The incident in the sky. It was a sunny afternoon when Marcus Evans and his 10-year-old son, Jaden, boarded a flight that was supposed to be an enjoyable, memorable experience. Marcus, a self-made millionaire and CEO of the airline they were traveling with, had finally taken a break from his hectic schedule to spend quality time with his son. Dressed in a simple but elegant suit, Marcus looked every bit the successful businessman, yet he was known for his humility and kindness. Jaden, with his innocent eyes full of curiosity, marveled at the luxury of the business class cabin. This trip was a treat for him. He rarely got to spend this kind of time with his father, and the opportunity to fly in business class was an added bonus. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus noticed his son's excitement and reached over to ruffle his hair. "You know, kiddo, I'm really glad we're doing this," he said, smiling warmly. "It's been too long since we've had time just for us." Jaden grinned, hugging his father. "I love it, Dad. Thank you for taking me with you." The flight had only been airborne for an hour or so when Jaden, curious as ever, asked if he could explore the cabin. Marcus, half smiling at his son's adventurous spirit, nodded. "Just be polite and respectful, okay?" Jaden nodded eagerly and unbuckled his seatbelt, venturing out into the cabin. He greeted the passengers with quiet hellos as he made his way toward the restroom. A few people gave him warm smiles, charmed by his polite demeanor and genuine innocence. As Jaden walked back to his seat, he accidentally bumped into a flight attendant who was arranging snacks on a service cart. A small amount of water from his cup splashed onto her uniform, leaving a faint mark. Emily Carter, the flight attendant, was known for her strict, no-nonsense attitude. She'd worked in the industry for over 15 years and had grown accustomed to passengers who tested her patience. But something in her eyes darkened as she looked down at Jaden, a young black boy standing nervously before her. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to turn heads in the cabin. Jaden's face fell, and he stammered, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to." But Emily wasn't listening. She sneered, looking Jaden up and down. "People like you don't belong in business class," she muttered under her breath, though loud enough for Jaden to hear. Her words were tinged with disdain, and her expression showed a deeply ingrained prejudice. Jaden, feeling small and ashamed, tried to apologize again. But before he could say anything, Emily's hand shot out, and she slapped him across the cheek, leaving a red mark on his face. The slap was quick, but the sting was harsh. Jaden's eyes filled with tears as he backed away, clutching his cheek in shock and disbelief. The nearby passengers, horrified, gasped and murmured among themselves. Some wanted to intervene but felt uncertain about how to react to such a shocking incident in the middle of a flight. Most were simply too stunned to move. Jaden looked around, seeking a familiar face, and caught a glimpse of his father, who had just emerged from his seat. Marcus had noticed the commotion and was now walking swiftly toward his son. He took in the scene, the red mark on Jaden's cheek, the tears in his eyes, and the uncomfortable expressions on the faces of nearby passengers. Marcus's face darkened, and his eyes locked onto Emily, who suddenly realized who this man was. A father's fury. As Marcus approached, every step he took was filled with purpose and restraint. His gaze was intense, his usually calm demeanor overshadowed by a simmering fury. The moment he reached Jaden, he gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder, scanning his face and seeing the tear-streaked cheek where the slap had landed. The redness of the mark stood out starkly against Jaden's soft brown skin, and Marcus's heart clenched with a mix of anger and pain. Jaden looked up at his father, eyes wide with a mix of relief and confusion. "Dad, I didn't mean to spill the water. I said I was sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. Marcus crouched down to Jaden's level, his face softening momentarily as he reassured his son. "Hey, it's okay, Jaden. You did nothing wrong," he murmured, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of barely controlled anger. He gave his son a comforting smile before straightening up, his gaze hardening as he turned his attention to Emily. Emily, realizing the gravity of the situation, took a step back, her face pale, and her usual confident expression faltering. She had heard rumors about Marcus Evans, the quiet yet powerful man who had risen from humble beginnings to become the CEO of this very airline. But until now, she hadn't connected him to the young boy she had just humiliated and assaulted. "Mr. Evans, I didn't realize," Emily stammered, trying to salvage the situation, but her words trailed off as Marcus's eyes bore into her, cold and unyielding. "Didn't realize what, Miss Carter?" Marcus's voice was soft but deadly serious, each word articulated with precision. The entire cabin seemed to go silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. "Didn't realize that the boy you slapped and humiliated was my son, or didn't realize that a child, any child, deserves to be treated with respect." Emily swallowed hard, glancing around as the eyes of the passengers bore down on her. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Marcus held up a hand, stopping her. "What I just witnessed," he continued, his voice low and controlled, "was nothing short of unacceptable. Not only did you physically assault a child, but you did so with a clear sense of disdain and prejudice. Tell me, Miss Carter, do you think a job like this entitles you to treat others as less than human?" The flight attendant's face flushed, a mix of shame and fear evident in her eyes. It was an accident. I didn't mean to," she stammered, grasping for excuses, but her words rang hollow. Marcus's expression remained impassive, but his anger was palpable. "An accident? Slapping my son's face because he spilled a little water on your uniform is an accident." His voice was cold and deliberate. "I built this airline with the principle of respect at its core. I didn't claw my way up to see that principle trampled by someone like you." Emily took another step back, visibly shaken. She had never been confronted like this, especially by someone of Marcus's stature. She glanced around, looking for a sympathetic face, but all she saw were passengers who were equally appalled by her actions. "Sir, I didn't mean to upset anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake." Marcus let out a slow, steady breath, choosing his next words carefully. "A mistake is something you can apologize for, Miss Carter. This was deliberate and driven by prejudice, and it's not something I can overlook." As he spoke, he placed a gentle hand on Jaden's shoulder, silently reassuring his son. "My family and I believe in forgiveness, but we also believe in accountability. Your behavior has consequences, and you'll face them." Marcus reached for his phone, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. He sent a quick message to the airline's HR department, ensuring that disciplinary action would be waiting for Emily when the plane landed. When he looked up, his eyes met hers once again, and she could see that her fate had been sealed. Emily's shoulders slumped, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her. She knew there would be no sympathy, no escape from the repercussions of her choices. She could see the disappointment in Marcus's eyes, a disappointment that cut deeper than any scolding or reprimand she had ever faced. Taking a shaky breath, Emily muttered, "I'm sorry. To you and your son. I shouldn't have acted like that." But Marcus's face remained impassive. He nodded curtly. "That's for my son to accept or not. But as for your job with this airline, it ends today." His words were final, each syllable spoken with authority. At that moment, one of the senior flight attendants, a woman named Linda, approached cautiously. She had heard what happened and had quietly observed from a distance. She gave Marcus a respectful nod and looked at Emily with a mixture of pity and sternness. "Miss Carter," Linda said firmly, "please step aside and gather your belongings. I'll take over your duties for the remainder of the flight." The message was clear. Emily's actions had left her unwelcome among her own colleagues. Emily's face crumpled as she realized the full weight of her situation. Nodding numbly, she turned and walked away, her steps unsteady. She avoided eye contact with the other passengers, her once confident demeanor shattered by the confrontation with Marcus and the eyes of the passengers who had witnessed her disgrace. As she disappeared from view, Marcus turned his attention back to Jaden, who was still visibly shaken by the incident. Marcus kneeled down, bringing himself to eye level with his son. He placed a comforting hand on Jaden's shoulder. "Are you all right, son?" he asked softly, his voice filled with warmth and concern. Jaden nodded, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. "I just don't understand, Dad. Why did she do that? I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus's heart ached at his son's confusion and pain. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, people make terrible choices, Jaden. They let their own fears or prejudices cloud their judgment, and they end up hurting others. But that doesn't mean you're less worthy or that you did anything wrong. You are strong, kind, and good. And don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Jaden managed a small smile, reassured by his father's words. "Thanks, Dad." Marcus pulled his son into a warm embrace, holding him close. "You're welcome, kiddo. And remember, you're never alone. We'll face these things together, no matter what." As they sat there, enveloped in each other's presence, Marcus knew that this moment would stay with both of them. It was a reminder of the harsh realities they sometimes faced, but also of the strength they had as a family. The rest of the flight passed quietly. Passengers, moved by the interaction they had witnessed, occasionally cast sympathetic glances in their direction. Some even nodded at Marcus, silently offering their support. And as Jaden eventually drifted off to sleep, resting his head on his father's shoulder, Marcus knew that he would do everything in his power to protect his son's dignity and ensure he grew up in a world where respect and kindness were non-negotiable. But deep down, Marcus wasn't done yet. He knew that there was more to be done, that Emily's actions required not just punishment, but an opportunity for understanding and change. He resolved to take additional steps, ones that would turn this painful incident into a powerful lesson for everyone involved. The plans for redemption. The jet descended gracefully onto the runway, the familiar bumps signaling that they had arrived. Marcus looked down at his son, still asleep against his shoulder, his small face calm and peaceful despite the turmoil of the past few hours. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus carefully shifted Jaden so he wouldn't wake him, gently easing the boy into a more comfortable position. This wasn't how he had imagined their flight home going, but he was determined to turn this painful episode into something meaningful. The senior flight attendant, Linda, approached quietly. "Mr. Evans, we've arranged for a private exit for you and your son, away from the main disembarking area. If you'd like, we also have someone waiting to escort you to your car." Marcus nodded his appreciation. "Thank you, Linda. That's very considerate." Linda hesitated for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Mr. Evans, I just wanted to say that I'm truly sorry for what happened. Emily's behavior does not reflect the values of our team, and we're all ashamed of how she treated your son." Marcus gave her a grateful nod. "I appreciate that, Linda. I know that one person's actions don't speak for everyone here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I'd like to ensure that what happened today doesn't happen again, not to my son or anyone else." Linda's face softened. "Of course, Mr. Evans. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know." As the plane came to a stop, Marcus gently woke Jaden, who stretched and rubbed his eyes. The exhaustion of travel, combined with the emotional weight of the incident, was evident on his face. But Jaden managed a small smile, reassured by his father's presence. They exited the plane via the private jetway, bypassing the other passengers and moving directly to a waiting car. As they settled in, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Sophia, Jaden's mother, calling to check in. "Hey, love," Marcus answered, his voice warm yet tired. "Hey," Sophia replied, her voice filled with concern. "How was the flight? Did Jaden enjoy his first experience in business class?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at his son, who was now looking out the window, his expression a mixture of curiosity and lingering sadness. "We had an incident," Marcus finally said, keeping his voice low. He gave her a brief rundown of what had happened, describing Emily's actions and Jaden's reaction. Sophia's voice tightened with anger. She slapped him. "Are you serious, Marcus? How could anyone treat a child like that?" "I know," Marcus replied, his voice soft but firm. "I fired her on the spot, and the airline will take disciplinary action. But I think there's more we can do here." "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, her voice a mixture of anger and curiosity. "I want this to be a lesson for her, not just punishment," Marcus explained. "Emily needs to understand the impact of her actions, and I want to turn this into something constructive. I'm not interested in simply firing her and moving on." Sophia was silent for a moment, then let out a sigh. "You're a better person than me, Marcus. I would have been satisfied just knowing she's gone." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but if she never learns, she'll carry that prejudice with her. And it'll hurt more people. And if we can teach her something meaningful, maybe she'll change. I want her to see what she's done from a new perspective." Sophia nodded on the other end of the line, admiration evident in her voice. "Okay, love. I trust you. Let's make it happen." Marcus ended the call and looked over at Jaden, who was now watching him with a quiet intensity. "What's going to happen to her, Dad?" Jaden asked softly. Marcus ended the call and looked over at Jaden, who was now watching him with a quiet intensity. "What's going to happen to her, Dad?" Jaden asked softly. "We're going to give her a chance to learn from her mistake," Marcus replied, meeting his son's gaze. "Sometimes, people need to be shown a different perspective before they can understand the harm they've caused. I'm going to make sure she gets that chance." The next morning, Marcus was back in his office, overlooking the city skyline. He had always loved the view from his corner office, the vast expanse of glass giving him a panoramic perspective that symbolized his hard-earned success. But today, his focus was on a different kind of achievement. He pulled up the contact information for David Thompson, the owner of a prominent training and staffing agency. David was an old friend and one of Marcus's most trusted advisors when it came to talent management. He dialed David's number, and after a few rings, his friend's familiar voice greeted him. "Marcus, it's been too long," David said cheerfully. "It has," Marcus replied, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Listen, David, I need a favor. I have a situation that requires some unique handling." David chuckled. "You always have something interesting up your sleeve, Marcus. Tell me what's going on." Marcus explained the incident on the flight, detailing Emily's actions and his decision to fire her. David listened intently, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a serious tone. "So you want her to go through some kind of training?" David asked, his voice thoughtful. "Not just training," Marcus clarified. "I want her to experience a role where she'll have to work closely with diverse colleagues, particularly people from communities she clearly doesn't understand or respect. I want her to learn the importance of empathy and respect firsthand." David was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "You're asking for a big shift, Marcus, but I think I have just the place. There's a youth community center where working with that could use an extra hand. They're always understaffed, and it's a diverse environment, people from all walks of life." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. "That sounds perfect. Let's make it happen." Within days, the arrangements were in place. Emily had been informed of the opportunity through her staffing agency, with the implication that this was one of the few available options given her recent termination and the difficulty of securing new employment. She reluctantly accepted, her financial situation leaving her little choice. The community center, located in a bustling, culturally diverse neighborhood, was worlds apart from the upscale airline environment she was accustomed to. The center served as a safe haven for underprivileged youth, providing after-school programs, mentoring, and educational support. The children who frequented the center came from various backgrounds, many of them dealing with challenges Emily couldn't even begin to understand. On her first day, Emily walked into the center, her expression uncertain. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork created by the children, each piece filled with joy, hope, and resilience. She glanced around, feeling out of place in her neatly pressed blouse and designer handbag. "Good morning, Miss Carter," greeted Mrs. Lopes, the center's director, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and a gentle demeanor. "We're so glad to have you here. Let me introduce you to the team." As they walked through the center, Emily took in the sight of the children laughing, talking, and working together. She noticed a few teenagers helping younger kids with homework, their patience and kindness evident. Mrs. Lopes guided her to a small office where she would be assisting with administrative tasks and coordinating activities for the children. Her first task was simple, organizing supplies for the art program. But as she worked, she overheard snippets of conversation from the kids, stories of struggles that she had never experienced, stories of resilience that left her unexpectedly moved. Later that day, Emily was assigned to work with a group of teenagers who were preparing a presentation on community unity. They greeted her politely, but with a subtle wariness, sensing her discomfort. One of the girls, a bright 15-year-old named Layla, noticed the tension and spoke up. "Have you worked with kids like us before?" Layla asked, her tone friendly but direct. Emily hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "No, I haven't," she admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. "But I'm here to help however I can." Layla nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's just, sometimes people don't understand what we go through. They look at us and think they know us, but they don't." Emily felt a pang of guilt as Layla's words hit home. She had done exactly that to Jaden, assumed she knew him, assumed he didn't belong. But here, she was faced with a different reality, one where the walls she had built around her beliefs were beginning to crumble. Over the next few days, Emily found herself opening up to the children, listening to their stories, and learning from their experiences. Each conversation chipped away at the biases she had held, forcing her to confront the narrow lens through which she had viewed the world. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, Mrs. Lopes approached her. "How are you finding it here, Emily?" Emily paused, her gaze distant. "It's eye-opening. I never realized how much I had to learn. These kids, they're amazing. They're stronger than I ever gave them credit for." Mrs. Lopes smiled gently. "Empathy is a powerful thing, Emily. Sometimes it takes stepping out of our own world to truly understand the lives of others." As Emily left the center that night, she felt a mixture of gratitude and regret. Gratitude for the chance to change, and regret for the harm she had caused. She thought of Jaden, his innocent face, his trembling voice, and the impact her actions had left on him. For the first time, she felt the weight of her actions, not just as consequences, but as wounds she had inflicted on others. And with each step away from the community center, Emily resolved to become someone worthy of forgiveness. A new perspective. Over the following weeks, Emily's time at the community center continued to challenge her understanding of the world, and more importantly, her understanding of herself. Every day brought new stories, faces, and experiences that made her confront her prejudices and assumptions. She had once prided herself on her professionalism and high standards, but here, among children and families who faced struggles she had never imagined, those words felt hollow. One afternoon, as Emily was organizing books in the center's small library, she overheard a group of kids talking about their dreams. They spoke with such passion, despite knowing the obstacles they would likely face. There was Rashid, who dreamed of becoming a lawyer to fight for those without a voice. Maria, who wanted to be a teacher and help kids like herself find their way. And little Jamal, who, at 8 years old, already dreamed of being a pilot, despite having never been on a plane. Emily listened, a mix of wonder and sorrow filling her. These children, who had so little, had such big dreams. She thought back to her younger self, growing up in a family where success was expected, where resources and opportunities were readily available. Her achievements had always been within reach, simply a matter of working hard and following the steps laid out for her. She realized now how privileged she had been, and how blind she had been to the realities of those who didn't share her advantages. Later that day, as she was preparing for an art activity with the younger kids, she spotted Jaden's father, Marcus Evans, entering the community center. She froze, the weight of shame settling heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't expected to see him here, and the thought of facing him, knowing what she had done to his son, made her heart race. Marcus walked in with an air of quiet confidence, greeting a few staff members and children who recognized him. He had become a familiar face at the center, known not only as the airline executive, but as a benefactor who supported several community programs. As he approached Emily, she felt a wave of emotions: fear, guilt, and a deep desire for redemption. "Mr. Evans," she began, her voice barely a whisper, I didn't expect to see you here." Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, his tone measured, "I come here regularly to support the programs. I believe in the work they're doing, and I believe in giving back to the community." She nodded, feeling the full impact of his words. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," she managed, her voice shaky. "I've been learning a lot here, and I understand now just how wrong I was. I can't believe I treated your son, Jaden, that way. He didn't deserve that. No one does." Marcus studied her for a moment, his gaze steady. "Do you really understand, Emily? Do you truly understand the weight of your actions, beyond just feeling sorry for yourself?" Emily swallowed, feeling the intensity of his question. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I think I'm starting to," she replied honestly. "Every day here, I see these kids, these families, and I realize how narrow my view of the world was. I thought I was superior because of my job, my background, my skin color. But I see now that none of those things make me better than anyone else. In fact, they made me blind to what really matters." Marcus's expression softened slightly, though his eyes still held a hint of sternness. "And what do you think really matters?" Emily paused, considering his question. "Kindness," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Empathy. Understanding. I didn't have any of those things before. I thought success was about titles, income, status. But now I see that real success is about how we treat others, especially those who are different from us." For the first time, Marcus nodded, as if he saw something genuine in her. "I'm glad to hear that, Emily. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it sounds like you're beginning to understand the harm you caused. My son is still recovering from that experience. It wasn't just the slap. It was the look you gave him, the way you dismissed him as if he were unworthy of respect." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She remembered that day vividly now, each detail seared into her memory with a painful clarity. The shock on Jaden's face, the fear, the tears he had tried so hard to hide. "I'll never forgive myself for what I did," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I want to make it right, somehow." Marcus looked at her, his gaze softened, and his voice grew gentler. "Making things right isn't always about a grand gesture. Sometimes it's about consistently choosing to do better. It's about showing up every day, understanding your biases, and working to overcome them." As Marcus turned to leave, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had come here feeling forced into a situation she didn't want, but now she saw it as an opportunity, a chance to rebuild herself from the ground up. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's transformation continued. She became deeply involved in the programs at the community center, not just as a helper, but as someone truly invested in the lives of the people around her. She started organizing events, planning fundraisers, and even tutoring some of the younger kids. Her heart softened, and her empathy grew as she learned more about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. One evening, as she was packing up to leave, she noticed Mrs. Lopes, the center's director, watching her with a smile. "You've come a long way, Emily," Mrs. Lopes said, her voice warm. Emily looked down, a bit embarrassed. "I still have a long way to go, but thank you. I feel like I'm finally doing something meaningful." Mrs. Lopes nodded. "You are. The kids adore you, and they can see the change in you. We all can." Emily's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and pride. For the first time in her life, she felt that her worth wasn't tied to her job title or her possessions, but to the impact she was making on others. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the flight attendant. She was a mentor, a friend, a source of support. As she walked home that night, her thoughts drifted back to Jaden. She hadn't seen him since the day of the incident, and though she knew it wasn't her place to ask, she hoped he was healing. She wanted more than anything to apologize to him, to show him that she had changed. But she also knew that healing took time, and that forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be earned. The next morning, she received a call from Marcus's assistant, asking her to meet with him at his office. Emily's heart raced as she agreed, uncertain about what to expect. She knew she had made progress, but she also knew that facing Marcus meant facing her past actions directly. When she arrived at his office, Marcus greeted her with a calm but reserved expression. He gestured for her to sit, and they settled into a quiet conversation. "I've been hearing good things about your work at the community center," Marcus began, his tone neutral. Emily nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "It's changed me in ways I never expected," she replied honestly. "I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, even though I didn't deserve it." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And what have you learned, Emily? What's the most important lesson you've taken away from all of this?" Emily took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've learned that prejudice blinds us, not just to the humanity in others, but to our own humanity as well. I let my biases control my actions, and it hurt a child, your son. I see now that every person deserves respect and kindness, regardless of their background, their appearance, or where they come from." Marcus's gaze softened, and he nodded. "You've come a long way, Emily, and I can see that you're genuinely trying to change. But remember, this is a journey that never truly ends. It's not about a single experience. It's about choosing to be better every day." Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew she would never undo the pain she had caused Jaden, but she could live her life in a way that honored his strength and resilience. She could strive to be a person he would be proud of, even if they never crossed paths again. As she left Marcus's office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue working at the community center, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to make a difference. She was no longer the person she had been on that flight, and for the first time, she felt truly free. In the months that followed, Emily became an integral part of the community center, a beacon of support for those around her. She found joy in the smiles of the children, in the friendships she formed, and in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was making amends, not just to Jaden, but to herself. And though she knew she could never erase the past, she had found a way to move forward, guided by empathy, humility, and a commitment to kindness. The turning point. Months passed, and Emily's life had become entwined with the community center in ways she could never have anticipated. She was no longer simply helping out with tasks and events. She had taken on a leadership role, working closely with the center's director, Mrs. Lopes, to create new programs for the children and families. Emily's dedication and transformation had not gone unnoticed. Her once rigid demeanor had softened, replaced by a warmth and humility that seemed to grow with every life she touched. One particular Friday afternoon, Emily was organizing supplies for a new art program when Mrs. Lopes called her into the office. Mrs. Lopes, always warm and encouraging, looked at her with a knowing smile. "Emily, there's someone here to see you," she said, a sparkle in her eye. Emily glanced at Mrs. Lopes, puzzled, and followed her into the main hallway. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Jaden and his mother, Sophia, standing there. Sophia had a gracious, welcoming smile, and Jaden looked a bit shy, holding a small wrapped gift in his hands. For a moment, Emily was frozen, a mix of emotions flooding over her: surprise, nervousness, guilt. She hadn't expected to see Jaden again, and certainly not in a setting where he would have a choice about meeting her. She swallowed, her hands clenching slightly, unsure of what to say or do. "Hello, Emily," Sophia greeted warmly, her voice calm and gentle. Emily managed a small smile, her voice a little shaky. "Mrs. Evans, Jaden, I wasn't expecting. It's so good to see you both." Sophia nodded, her expression soft but serious. "Jaden wanted to see the place you've been working at, and I thought it was important to bring him here. He's been hearing a lot about the changes you've made." Jaden, holding the small gift, stepped forward, his eyes searching Emily's face. He took a deep breath, then looked up at her. "Miss Carter, my dad told me about the things you've been doing here. He said you've been helping kids and working really hard to make things better. I wanted to come and say thank you." Emily's heart clenched. This was the same boy she had treated so harshly, who had every reason to hate her, yet here he was thanking her. Her voice trembled as she responded. "Jaden, you have no idea how much it means to me to hear that. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that every day I try to become a better person because of you. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. It was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to forget. But thank you for being here." Jaden looked down at the gift in his hands, then held it out to her. "I made this for you," he said shyly. "It's a drawing. Mrs. Lopes said you're helping the kids with their art, so I thought you might like it." Emily accepted the small gift, her eyes welling up as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a drawing of a community center, much like the one they were standing in, with kids playing outside, and a woman standing in the doorway, welcoming them in. Emily recognized herself in the drawing, her arms open wide, surrounded by smiling faces. She blinked back tears, touched beyond words. "Jaden, this is beautiful. Thank you. I'll treasure it." Sophia placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Jaden insisted we come, and I agreed. I think it's important for him to see that people can change. That forgiveness isn't always easy, but sometimes it's the most powerful gift we can give." Emily nodded, deeply moved. "Thank you, Mrs. Evans. I never imagined I'd get the chance to make things right, to show Jaden that I've changed. I'll never forget this." They spent a few minutes talking, and Emily showed Jaden around the center, proudly explaining the various activities and programs she had helped organize. Jaden seemed genuinely interested, and his presence filled the space with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Emily felt lighter, as if the burden she had been carrying was beginning to lift. For the first time, she felt a sense of true closure, a belief that she could finally move forward. After Sophia and Jaden left, Mrs. Lopes approached Emily, a proud smile on her face. "That was a big step, Emily. I'm proud of you, and I think Jaden and his family are, too." Emily took a deep breath, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Lopes. I feel like I've been given a second chance, one I don't want to waste." That evening, as she sat in her small apartment, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had once been a woman who judged others without a second thought, who viewed her own success as a measure of her worth and superiority. But now she understood that true worth wasn't defined by wealth or social status, but by kindness, empathy, and the impact one could make in others' lives. The following week, Emily was at the community center as usual, preparing for a career workshop she had organized for teenagers in the community. The goal was to help them develop practical skills and build confidence as they prepared for the challenges of adulthood. She had invited several guest speakers, including business professionals, artists, and educators from diverse backgrounds, to share their stories and offer guidance. As the teens filed into the room, Emily noticed a mix of excitement and nervousness on their faces. She began by sharing her own story, this time being completely transparent about her past mistakes and the hard lessons she had learned. She spoke about the importance of humility, the value of listening, and the courage it took to change. "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You define your own worth by how you treat others and the impact you make. No matter where you come from, you have the power to choose kindness, to be better, and to break through any limitations." As the workshop continued, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer bound by her past. Instead, she was driven by the promise of a brighter future, not just for herself, but for everyone she could inspire. The teens looked up to her with respect, and she felt a connection with them that went beyond words. They saw her as someone who had walked through her own fire and come out stronger, someone who understood their struggles and genuinely cared about their success. After the workshop, a young girl named Aisha approached her, shyly holding a notebook filled with sketches. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know if I could do it, but hearing your story, it makes me feel like maybe I can, too." Emily smiled warmly, recognizing a bit of her younger self in Aisha's eyes. "You absolutely can, Aisha. Don't ever doubt that. And if you ever need help, I'm here for you." The girl's face lit up, and she gave Emily a quick hug before running back to join her friends. Watching her, Emily felt a surge of pride and hope. She was finally making a real difference, one that couldn't be measured by promotions or accolades, but by the lives she touched and the hearts she inspired. That evening, as she was locking up the center, she noticed Marcus Evans standing by the front door. He gave her a nod, his expression calm but approving. "I heard the workshop was a success," he said. Emily smiled, nodding. "It was. I think I learned as much from them as they did from me." Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. "Emily, I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of the work you're doing here. It's not easy to change, but you've proven that you're willing to put in the effort, not just for yourself, but for this community." Emily's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. I owe a lot of that to you. If you hadn't given me this opportunity, I don't know where I'd be." He shook his head. "You did the work, Emily. You chose this path, and I can see that it's made you a better person. That's something to be proud of." As he turned to leave, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She had been given a second chance, and she had used it to become someone she could respect, someone her younger self would have looked up to. She was no longer defined by her mistakes, but by the courage it took to overcome them. In that moment, standing in the quiet hallway of the community center, Emily knew she had finally found her purpose. And she vowed to continue this journey, to be a force for good, and to repay the kindness that had been shown to her by paying it forward, one life at a time. A new legacy. A few more years passed, and Emily's transformation continued to ripple outward, affecting not only her own life, but the lives of countless others in the community. She became a fixture at the community center, eventually becoming its director when Mrs. Lopes retired. Her journey from prejudice to purpose was not only recognized by those close to her, but had also garnered attention across the city. Local newspapers and online publications wrote about her story, highlighting her work, dedication, and the unlikely yet powerful role she played in transforming the lives of underserved youth. The community center had expanded under Emily's leadership, turning into a vibrant hub of opportunity. It now offered a broad range of programs, from career workshops to mentorship, mental health resources, art classes, and even internships that Emily had arranged with local businesses. Many of these opportunities were backed by individuals and companies who had been moved by her story and wanted to support her mission. The center's motto, displayed proudly on a banner above the main entrance, read, "Building a future, one step at a time." One crisp autumn morning, Emily was preparing for the center's annual fundraising gala, an event she had organized to raise funds to expand their facilities further. The theme for this year's gala was Second Chances, a tribute to her own journey and a message of hope for everyone seeking redemption and growth. As Emily was reviewing the final details in her office, she received an unexpected visit from Marcus Evans and his family. She hadn't seen him in person for quite some time. He had been a steadfast supporter of the center from behind the scenes, but his visits were rare, his busy schedule pulling him in many directions. She rose from her desk, a warm smile spreading across her face as she greeted him, Sophia, and of course, Jaden, who was now a teenager. "It's so wonderful to see you all," Emily said, her voice warm with genuine affection. She had kept in touch with the family, exchanging letters and occasional calls, but seeing them in person filled her with gratitude and nostalgia. They had been her catalysts, the ones who had set her on this path, and she would never forget it. Marcus smiled, his handshake firm yet friendly. "We couldn't miss this event, Emily. We've been following all the progress here, and Jaden insisted we come tonight to see everything you've built." Jaden, now almost as tall as his father, smiled shyly at her. His face had matured, but his eyes still held the same kindness and wisdom that had moved her years ago. He stepped forward and handed her a small box, neatly wrapped. "This is for you, Miss Carter," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Emily took the box, feeling her heart swell as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden plaque with an engraving that read, "Thank you for teaching us the power of forgiveness." The craftsmanship was simple, yet beautiful, and Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. "Jaden, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. This means more to me than you'll ever know." Sophia stepped forward, embracing Emily. "You've come so far, Emily, and we're incredibly proud of you. What you've done here, it's not just a change for yourself, but for the entire community. You're a beacon of hope." Emily hugged her back, deeply moved. She had always been grateful to the Evans family, but seeing them here, knowing they had followed her progress and believed in her, solidified her commitment to continue this work, no matter how challenging it might be. That evening, as the gala commenced, the community center was filled with people, local business leaders, parents, students, and donors, all gathered to celebrate the growth and impact of the center. Soft music played in the background, and the hall was decorated with photos documenting the center's journey, from its humble beginnings to its present-day vibrance. Emily moved through the crowd, greeting guests and thanking them for their support, her heart full as she saw the diversity and unity that the center had cultivated. At the height of the evening, Marcus took the stage as a guest speaker. He shared his story about the airline and his work, but then focused on something more personal, his relationship with Emily and her transformation. He spoke eloquently about second chances, the importance of forgiveness, and the power of change. "Emily Carter taught us all a lesson," he said, his voice steady and clear, resonating through the room. "When we're given the chance to change, we have a choice, to retreat into our old ways or to rise above them." Emily chose the harder path, the one less traveled, and in doing so, she became an inspiration not only to this community, but to everyone who believes in the possibility of redemption. She didn't just ask for a second chance. She earned it and transformed that chance into a legacy. The crowd erupted into applause, and Emily felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and humility. She had never imagined her life would lead her here, to a moment where her story would inspire others, where her mistakes would become the foundation for something so meaningful. When the applause died down, Emily took the stage. She looked out over the crowd, taking a deep breath as she began to speak. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I can't express how much it means to me to see all of you gathered to support this mission. A mission that, in many ways, was born out of my own need to change. I used to think that success was measured by titles and wealth, by how much power one could wield over others. But I was wrong. Real success is found in kindness, in empathy, in the willingness to understand each other's struggles and to lend a helping hand. This community center exists because of the support, love, and forgiveness that was shown to me, even when I didn't deserve it. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "And it's that same support and forgiveness that I want to offer to anyone who walks through these doors. No matter where you come from, no matter what mistakes you've made, you belong here. You have a place here. And as long as I'm a part of this center, I'll do everything I can to make sure that's true." The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. She looked over at Marcus, Sophia, and Jaden, each of them smiling back at her with pride. "I dedicate this night to everyone who believes in second chances," Emily concluded, "and to those who have shown me the way. Thank you." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the hall. Emily stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter than she ever had before. Her journey had come full circle, and while there would always be challenges, she knew she was on the right path. She had found a purpose that transcended personal redemption. She was making a difference in ways she had never dreamed possible. After the gala, as the guests departed, Emily stood by the entrance of the community center, watching as families, young people, and elders shared stories and laughter, inspired by the evening. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Marcus. "You did an incredible job tonight, Emily," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Thank you, Marcus," she replied, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I don't think any of this would have been possible without you and your family. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Marcus shook his head. "You gave yourself that chance, Emily. We just reminded you of the person you had the potential to become." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last guests departed. Sophia and Jaden waved to them from the car, and Emily waved back, feeling the surge of affection for the family that had changed her life. As she turned to head back inside, she glanced up at the community center sign, illuminated against the dark night. It no longer represented a place of obligation or punishment. It was now a beacon of hope, a reminder of her journey and the countless lives she had touched. Emily knew that her story was far from over. She had much more to give, more lives to uplift, and more changes to make. Her legacy was just beginning, and she was ready to face the future with courage and determination. Walking back into the community center, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had finally found where she belonged, not in a place defined by status or wealth, but in a community that embraced her for who she was and what she could offer. Emily Carter had become a force for good, a mentor, and a friend to all those who walked through the doors of the center. And as she closed the door behind her, the light from within spilling out into the night, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, a journey dedicated to lifting others up and building a legacy of kindness, compassion, and unwavering hope.